everything must be paid for, voted no on the legislation that requires stuff to be paid for. So when Senator Coburn says he is blocking unemployment benefits or blocking funding for wounded veterans caregivers like he did last year, or anything else that he now says he's going to block, not because he wants to block those things, but because of his unyielding principle that he won't vote for anything that isn't paid for, when he says that, he doesn't really mean it. He's voted for plenty that wasn't paid for. But the senator has not let that hypocritical record get in the way of feeling great about himself for standing on his fake principles. He told the Hill newspaper about himself yesterday, quote, "The easiest thing in the world is to pass this bill unpaid for. But consider the millions of Americans whose financial futures would be damaged versus the relatively small amount of people who will be affected by this delay. Now you tell me which vote takes the most courage." Here's a hint. If you're complimenting yourself on your own courage, something else might be at work here other than just your sheer, selfless, humble bravery. Last summer, you may recall, Senator Coburn's housemate at the C Street house, Senator John Ensign, admitted having an extramarital affair with his staffer's wife, who was also his staffer. You may also recall that Senator Coburn got wrapped up right in the middle of that whole thing because of allegations that he secretly helped negotiate a cash payoff, essentially hush money, to be paid by John Ensign to the mistress and her family. At the time, Mr. Coburn categorically denied doing any such thing. He told reporters, quote, "I never made any assessment of paying anybody anything. Those are untruths. Those are absolute untruths." That was Mr. Coburn's official line until he finally decided to come clean to the New York Times a few months later, acknowledging to the Times in October that he was, in fact, Mr. Ensign's affair intermediary, despite his earlier vehement, self-righteous categorical denials of that. Senator Coburn was, in fact, the personal negotiator for Senator Ensign in the hush money discussions with the mistress's lawyer. In fact, Mr. Coburn is the one who personally rejected an $8.5 million settlement request from the mistress's lawyer, describing it as ridiculous. Despite being up to his eyeballs in the classy details of this deal by a married sitting senator to pay off his secret mistress, who he was still sleeping with at the time, Senator Coburn also found it in his heart to cast himself again as the upstanding, heroic man of virtue who no one should dare question about his involvement in what he definitely was involved in. He told reporters in July, quote, "I was counseling Senator Ensign as a physician and as an ordained deacon. That is privileged communication that I will never reveal to anybody, not to the Ethics Committee, not to a court of law, not to anybody." It's heroic, right? Tom Coburn providing mistress payoff haggling services in his capacity as a deacon. In his capacity as a physician, Tom Coburn providing obstetrical and gynecological advice to Senator John Ensign, bravely refusing to disclose anything about those conversations. Actually, Senator Coburn about-faced on that, too. He happily told the New York Times how stupid John Ensign had been and how Senator Ensign's judgment had been impaired by his arrogance. So much for never disclosing anything to anybody. Totally regardless of the Ensign affair, Mr. Coburn's time living at C Street has also put him at the center of an ethics and IRS complaint concerning that house. It alleges that C Street residents, like Senator Coburn, have been receiving way below market value, subsidized rent for a long time now. Instead of paying about $4,000 a month, which seems to be the going rate for the kinds of digs and kinds of services that C Street residents receive, they've only reportedly been paying $950 a month. A spokesman for Senator Coburn confirming to us that he pays not much more than $10,000 per year, which would be about $833 per month. The senator's spokesman's statement to us was that he pays more than $10,000 a year. Now, perhaps as a result of all of our questions about this, Senator Coburn has now gone out of the blue after me, gone after the way that I have talked about him and these problems on this show. Mr. Coburn told the website The Daily Caller yesterday, quote, "Look at Rachel Maddow. She comes at me on the basis of emotion. She demonizes me. I don't want conservatives to win on the basis of emotion. If we lower ourselves to the level they operate on, we hurt ourselves and our arguments." I mean, he does have a point. I am notoriously histrionic. And he is so calm, so cool, so even keel.
I can't tell you how worried I am about what this bill is going to do to my senior patients. I have a message for you. You're going to die sooner. What the American people ought to pray is that somebody can't make the vote tonight. That's what they ought to pray.
I have been known to burst into tears randomly just for fun. But Senator Coburn is the guy who's urging people to pray that a fellow senator might die, or at least be incapacitated, ahead of the health reform vote last December. Before that, we heard him telling seniors that they're going to die if health reform passes. During the Senate confirmation hearing for Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts in 2005, Senator Coburn, who again now accuses me of being too emotional, managed to pick his head up from the crossword puzzle that he was ostentatiously working on during the hearing long enough to give this assessment of our current politics.
When I ponder our country and its greatness, its weaknesses, its potential, my heart aches for less divisiveness, less polarization, less finger-pointing, less bitterness, less mindless partisanship, which at times sounds almost hateful to the ear of Americans.
Noble sentiment, hard to take from the guy who prays for fellow senators to die ahead of votes and tells seniors they're going to die because of health reform. Senator, I understand you are an emotional guy. I don't begrudge you that. I actually sort of admire that. But I think you might be projecting here. I don't feel at all emotional about you. I just want to know how you can stop people's desperately needed unemployment benefits by claiming a moral high ground principle of not voting for things that aren't paid for when you voted for plenty of things that aren't paid for. I want to know, Senator, who pays your rent? If you just live in this humble one bedroom and one bathroom, I want to know what room you were sitting in at C Street when you were John Ensign's financial negotiator for secretly paying off his mistress. It's not personal, Senator. I feel no emotion about it. I am reporting on your record, and this is what that feels like. A man in Texas has been indicted and charged with possession of an illegal firearm or destructive device. The destructive device in this case was allegedly a bomb. His name is Larry Eugene North. He's suspected of planting 36 explosive devices in mailboxes in East Texas, the last 10 of which were pipe bombs. Now, thankfully, no one was injured in any of these incidents. According to the Justice Department, quote, on the morning of April 7th, 2010, Mr. North was observed placing such a device in a collection box, leading to his subsequent arrest. Following his arrest, a search of Mr. North's vehicle revealed an additional destructive device. An agent with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives told the Associated Press today that Mr. North was motivated by some unspecified anger toward the federal government, which may have had to do with a court case. For the record, this arrest follows the arrests of people who have been threatening House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Senator Patty Murray, and House Republican Whip Eric Cantor, not to mention the arrests of 9 members of the Michigan Hutari militia who allegedly plotted to kill a law enforcement officer and wage war on the U.S. government. At the request of his attorneys, the judge in Mr. North's case has ordered a psychiatric evaluation. We will stay on this story for you. Less than a week after Hurricane Katrina struck the city of New Orleans on Sunday morning, September 4th, 2005, an NBC News camera crew was on a bridge over the Industrial Canal when they heard a commotion on the next bridge over. Here's what NBC's cameras caught that day. Police officers in a rental truck, not marked as a police vehicle, firing their weapons at something, impossible to tell what from that news crew's vantage point. And within hours, New Orleans police were giving their version of events. They said police had confronted a gang of armed men, that the men had shot at the police first, and the police had returned fire. A very different story emerged later. The people on the Danziger Bridge that day were unarmed. They were crossing the bridge apparently to try to find food and a safe place to stay as their city drowned. But a police call came in saying that officers are being shot at on that bridge. They weren't, but 7 officers responded to that call, and when the smoke cleared, 2 civilians were dead and 4 were wounded. None of the victims were armed. Yesterday, one of the 7 officers there at the bridge pled guilty to helping cover up those shootings. He is the 3rd officer in the past month and a half to plead guilty to covering up what happened with those shootings that day on the bridge. A cover-up that involved a planted gun, phony witnesses, falsified police reports, and lying to a state grand jury that convened to investigate the case. In the course of entering his guilty plea,